Let's get started. Story number 1.
In 2013, I worked as an assistant property manager for a chain of apartment buildings in upstate New York. One of the complexes was a bit older, built in the early 1970s, and had a long history of tenant turnover, mostly due to noise complaints and, as one of the old maintenance guys once said, bad energy. At the time, I didn't put much stock in that. I was 26, living on my own, and pretty practical. But that place changed how I thought about things. I still think about what happened there more than I'd like to admit. Unit 3B was where it started. A tenant named Meredith, mid-30s, moved in around June. She was quiet, kept to herself, and always paid on time. A model tenant. But in late July, I got a call from her saying that her lights were turning on by themselves at night. She assumed it was faulty wiring or a short. We sent someone up, but the electrician said everything looked fine. He even replaced 2 of the switches to be safe. 3 days later, she called again, this time sounding shaken. She said she woke up at 3:11 a.m. to the sound of someone walking in her kitchen. She lived alone. When she checked, nothing was there, but the fridge was open and all the cabinet doors were ajar. I visited the unit myself that afternoon. I didn't expect to find anything, probably some kind of sleepwalking or anxiety episode, I thought. But as I walked through her apartment, I got this heavy, pressing feeling in my chest, like being underwater. Meredith stood near the hallway, arms crossed tight, like she didn't want to go past it. I asked if she'd had any recent breakups or stressful events, just trying to rule things out. No, she said, but this place doesn't feel right. Not at night. A week later, she broke her lease and moved out, leaving half her furniture behind. She told me I could keep it or trash it. She didn't want it back. We listed the unit again. 2 college students moved in that September. They only stayed 3 weeks. One of them, Jess, came to the office in tears. She said her roommate was having panic attacks almost every night and refused to sleep in the apartment anymore. They were both hearing footsteps in the hall, hearing their names whispered from the bathroom when no one was inside. Jess said her roommate woke up with long scratches down her back after sleeping alone in her room. I went with them to inspect, but again, nothing visibly wrong. No evidence of break-in, no pests, no damaged windows. After they left, I pulled the old tenant files. I wanted to see if anyone had stuck around longer than 6 months. Going back to the early 2000s, I noticed a pattern. Almost every tenant in 3B had vacated early, many after making maintenance or noise complaints. One note from 2004 simply said, "Tenant claims man in corner is watching her. Recommends psychiatric follow-up." I asked the maintenance guy, Walt, who'd been with the company since the late 90s, if he remembered anything about that unit. "Oh yeah," he said. "I don't go in there unless I have to. Something's off. Like it's listening." Listening? Yeah. You ever been alone in a room and just know something else is there? That place has it. That line stuck with me. Over the next year, we struggled to keep anyone in that unit for long. One tenant left all her stuff behind, including her pet cat. Another moved out in the middle of the night, just vanished. No forwarding address, no notice. In the spring of 2015, corporate finally agreed to let me seal the unit off and use it for storage. I still have the keys, but I've never gone in since. Another experience, even harder to explain, happened to my friend Caleb when he was doing backcountry work in Colorado. He was part of a wilderness conservation crew that spent weeks clearing trails, doing forestry surveys, and sometimes camping deep in areas miles from the nearest road. In the summer of 2019, his crew was stationed in the San Juan Mountains, about 2 days' hike from the closest ranger station. On their 3rd night in, around 2 a.m., Caleb woke up needing to pee. He stepped out of his tent and walked about 30 feet toward the tree line. The moon was bright, and he said he didn't need his flashlight at first. While relieving himself, he suddenly heard twigs snapping, rhythmic, heavy footsteps. Not like a deer bounding or a bear foraging. It sounded like walking. He froze. The sound stopped, then started again, closer this time, crunching deliberately over dry ground. He whispered toward camp, thinking maybe one of the others had followed him, but no one responded. Then he saw it, a figure, tall, too tall to be human, standing just beyond the tree line, broad shoulders, long arms. No distinct features, just a pitch-black silhouette against the moonlit trees. It didn't move. Caleb stared at it for what felt like minutes, heart racing. Then it took one step forward. He ran. Not back to his tent, he bolted straight into the woods in a panic. He said he doesn't remember how far he went, but he tripped and smacked his head on a low branch, woke up with blood dried on the side of his face, and daylight creeping in. When he returned to camp, they had already started looking for him. The weirdest part? No one else saw or heard anything that night. They even thought he might have imagined it, but Caleb's GPS watch showed he'd run nearly a mile into the woods. That was his last season working in wilderness conservation. I know it's easy to dismiss things as dreams, illusions, paranoia, but what happened to my Uncle Ray can't be explained so easily. He was a long-haul trucker for over 20 years. In 2006, he was driving through Nevada on a run from Sacramento to Salt Lake City. Somewhere along US 50, the loneliest road in America, he pulled off to rest at a wide shoulder around 2 a.m. He turned off the engine, reclined his seat, and was about to doze off when he noticed headlights behind him. In the side mirror, he saw a small sedan pull up about 50 feet back. It didn't park or drive past. It just idled. He waited a few minutes, thinking it might be another trucker looking for room to pull off, but the car just stayed there. Then the high beams turned on. Blinded by the light, he shifted in his seat, agitated. He rolled down the window and stuck his head out to yell, but the beams turned off instantly. Now Ray wasn't a guy to scare easy. He was ex-Navy, tough as nails. But he said something about that car just felt wrong. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped out, figuring he'd confront the driver. The moment he got around to the back of his trailer and looked toward the sedan, it was gone. No engine sound, no dust kicked up, no sign of it on the road. Just empty blackness. He slept with his pistol on his lap for the rest of the night. Next morning, he found tire tracks that led behind his rig, but they only went one way, like the car appeared but never left. He never took that stretch of highway again without a co-driver. Then there's what happened to my coworker, Helena, in her childhood home in Massachusetts. She was raised in a 2-story colonial house built in the 1800s. Her parents had always claimed it was full of history, but when she turned 12, she started experiencing events that seemed less historical and more malicious. It started with noises. Not just creaks or settling, but full-on footsteps on the stairs in the middle of the night. Her father would get up to check, thinking it was her or her brother sneaking around, but no one was ever there. One night, she woke up to the sound of humming, a slow, low tune, like a lullaby. It came from the hallway. When she sat up, it stopped. She opened the door and stepped out. No one. But the humming started again, this time from downstairs. She called for her parents. They didn't hear anything, said maybe she was dreaming. 2 weeks later, she saw the woman. She was brushing her teeth before bed, and when she looked up into the mirror, there was a woman standing behind her. Pale skin, black eyes, no lips, just a long, stretched grin. Helena turned, but the bathroom was empty. She screamed so loud her dad broke the door open. They brought in a priest the next week, even though they weren't religious. He did a blessing, but things escalated. Objects started moving. Books flying off shelves, plates sliding off the counter. Her little brother woke up with a nosebleed one morning, and on the wall next to his bed were small handprints, too small for any of them, as if a child had smeared blood across it. They moved out within the month. The house was sold to a historical society and sits empty now. Helena still won't talk about it in detail. I've heard dozens of other stories like these, from friends, family, people who never had any history of mental illness or attention-seeking. Most don't share them publicly. They're afraid of being labeled or dismissed. But when you hear the same details, unseen figures, footsteps, voices, the overwhelming sense of being watched, repeated by people from completely different lives and places, you start to wonder, maybe the world really does have thin places, areas where whatever lies behind the veil of our normal lives presses just a bit closer to the surface, and sometimes it reaches through. Story the end.
Story number 2.
My older brother, Brian, used to drive freight overnight for a regional trucking company that mostly ran routes through the Midwest. He'd been doing it for almost 6 years, and we always thought it was the perfect job for him. He liked being alone, preferred the night, and wasn't afraid of long stretches of silence. But after one trip through Nebraska in the fall of 2019, he quit trucking completely. He wouldn't talk about it for over a year. And when he finally did, it was late one night on our parents' back porch, both of us drunk enough to let our guards down. That night started like most of his routes. He picked up a trailer full of dry goods from a warehouse in Council Bluffs, Iowa, and was scheduled to drop it off in Denver. The route was straightforward, mostly I-80, and it was something he'd done dozens of times. Weather was clear, roads were dry. Around 11 p.m., somewhere west of North Platte, he pulled into a rest stop to grab a soda and stretch his legs. There was only one other truck there, parked at the far end of the lot. No lights on inside, engine off, like the driver was sleeping. Brian used the restroom, walked around a bit, then got back in his cab and started driving again. About 20 minutes later, he saw someone on the side of the road. It was a woman, barefoot, in a torn white dress. She didn't wave, didn't stick out her thumb, just stood still, facing the road. At first, he thought it was some drugged-out hitchhiker, maybe even a prank. But something about how she stood, rigid, like her feet were bolted to the ground, gave him the chills. He drove past without slowing down. 10 miles later, he saw her again. Same woman, same posture, same dress. Now he started to worry. There was no way she could have gotten ahead of him on foot. No other cars had passed him, no nearby towns or exits. It was just flat land and empty highway. He told himself maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe there were two different women in the same dress. It was a stretch, but he needed something to hold on to. He turned on the radio to distract himself, scanned through static and country songs, but couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. That's when he saw her a third time. She was standing right on the shoulder, closer this time. Her face was pale, her mouth slightly open, and her eyes, he said they weren't white exactly, but like they didn't reflect light. Not glassy or lifeless, just black. He swerved slightly out of instinct, and for a second he thought she moved. Not walked, just glitched like a frame skipping forward. Now he was panicking. He floored the gas, desperate to get away. No matter what, he didn't want to stop again until he hit Denver. But 5 miles later, his dashboard lit up. Check engine. Then oil pressure low. Then brake system error. His truck started slowing, even though he hadn't let off the gas. He coasted to the side of the road, heart racing, and tried restarting the engine. Nothing. Then he saw movement in the mirror. She was behind the trailer, walking slowly toward his cab. He locked the doors, grabbed his phone, but had no signal. Not even one bar. He hit the horn. Long, loud, desperate. She didn't flinch, just kept walking. She stopped about 10 feet from his door and tilted her head slightly, like she was listening. Then she smiled. Not in a friendly way. Brian said it was more like she was trying to remember how to smile, like her face didn't know the shape. Then she started walking again, past his cab, toward the front of the truck. That's when the engine roared back to life. No error lights. No issues. He didn't wait. He floored it and drove for 3 straight hours without looking in the mirrors once. When he finally pulled into the distribution center, the manager told him his trailer was sealed and empty. Whatever he was supposed to be hauling was never loaded. No paperwork, no record of the pickup. Brian didn't argue. He parked the rig, handed over the keys, and told them he was done. He'd had odd experiences before, seeing figures in the fog, hearing voices on the CB radio with no source, but nothing like that. What stuck with him most was the smile, and how the engine died at the exact moment she appeared. He hasn't driven a truck since. Back when I was in high school, my best friend Miguel lived with his grandparents out in a rural part of New Mexico. Their property backed up to desert, nothing for miles but sand, dry brush, and the occasional fence post. One weekend in October, he invited me to stay over, and on Saturday night, we decided to go out back and mess around with his dad's old telescope. It was cold, pitch black outside, but the stars were incredible, more than I'd ever seen. Around midnight, we heard something moving in the brush a few yards away. At first, we thought it was a coyote, but it wasn't moving right. It didn't run or dart around. It just walked slowly in a straight line toward us. We turned off our flashlight to avoid drawing attention, and that's when we saw it. It wasn't a coyote or a person. It was wrong. Its limbs were too long, and its back legs bent the wrong way. It was hunched, but taller than either of us. Its skin was pale gray, almost reflective in the moonlight, and the sound it made like someone whispering through a fan. We stood frozen, barely breathing. It stopped about 20 feet from us and cocked its head like it knew we were there. Then it let out this short, high-pitched screech that cut through the silence like a blade. Miguel grabbed my arm and yanked me back toward the house. We ran inside, slammed the sliding door, and turned every light on. His grandparents came out of their room asking what the hell was going on, and when we told them, their faces went pale. His grandmother said something in Spanish that I didn't catch, and his grandfather went into the garage and came back with a jar of ash. He sprinkled it in a line across the sliding door and every window on the back wall. Then he said, in English this time, "Do not open the door, not until the sun is up." We sat in the living room until dawn, every light on, watching the windows. At one point around 3 a.m., something scratched at the back wall. Long, slow drags, like claws. Miguel's grandfather never explained what that thing was. But he told us that some things out in the desert weren't meant to be seen, that if you ever hear whispering at night and don't see where it's coming from, you walk away and don't look back. I haven't gone camping since. One of the most unsettling stories I ever heard came from a woman I dated in college, Julia. She was a quiet, rational person, biology major, didn't believe in anything supernatural, but there was one story she told that she never joked about. When she was 11, her family moved into a rental house in western Massachusetts. It was an older place from the 1800s, but recently renovated. She and her younger brother shared a room upstairs while their parents took the master bedroom on the ground floor. Not long after moving in, Julia started hearing whispers at night. They were soft, just below the threshold of intelligibility, and always came from the closet. Her parents brushed it off as the house settling or whined through the old vents. But the whispers became more distinct, sometimes a word here or there. Stop, stay, mine. One night, she woke up to see her little brother standing in the doorway of their room, facing the closet. He was asleep, eyes closed, breathing slow, but his hand was pointing straight at the closet door. She got up to shake him awake, but before she touched him, he whispered, "He's still in there." She never moved so fast in her life. She grabbed him and ran downstairs, screaming. Her parents calmed them down, said he was just sleepwalking, but she refused to sleep upstairs after that. They moved her to the downstairs guest room. A few weeks later, her parents went out for the night, leaving her and her brother with a babysitter. Around 9 p.m., the sitter went to check on the kids and found her brother talking to the closet in their shared room. He was having a full conversation, asking questions, nodding, laughing. The sitter asked who he was talking to. He said, "The man who watches." Julia and her brother were sent to stay with their aunt after that. Her parents had the house blessed, then brought in an inspector. They found something behind the closet drywall, a small bricked-off alcove about 4 feet wide, filled with old dolls, broken glass, and animal bones. There were scratch marks on the brick. Inside. From the other side. They moved out that same month. Julia never told me what scared her more, the whispers, her brother's sleep-talking, or the fact that sometimes, even years later, she still dreams about a man with no face standing in that closet. Every time I think about these stories, I get that feeling again, like I'm not really alone, like something is just behind the curtain of normal life, watching, waiting. Story the end.
Story number 3.
I used to be a delivery driver for a third-party logistics company that worked with a major retail chain. We'd get all kinds of routes, from basic city deliveries to long-haul runs through rural areas. This story happened in the fall of 2019 during one of those overnight rural shifts I took for extra money. I was supposed to drop off a pallet of supplies to a store located in a small mountain town in northern Pennsylvania. The drive was about 6 hours one way, and the company had a policy that you weren't supposed to stop and sleep unless it was absolutely necessary. You were on the clock from departure to arrival and expected to get back in the same day. I left around 4 p.m., planning to make it there by about 10 p.m., unload, and drive back through the early morning. It was foggy most of the way, the kind of dense, wet fog that makes the trees on either side of the road look like smudges in your peripheral vision. The route GPS gave me went through a bunch of back roads after I exited the highway. barely lit, winding through forests and past farms, maybe one gas station every 50 miles or so. Somewhere past 9 p.m., I realized I hadn't seen another car for over an hour. Then, just before a sharp curve, I saw a sign, State Detour, bridge closed. The GPS recalculated automatically, and I followed it without thinking, turning onto a narrow road that looked more like a driveway than anything else. About 5 minutes in, I started to regret it. Trees arched over the road, branches scraping the top of the van, and the pavement gave way to gravel. The deeper I went, the worse the road became. Potholes, branches on the ground, total darkness except for my headlights. I tried to turn around, but the road was too narrow. I figured I'd follow it until it hit a proper intersection. The GPS lost signal. That's when I saw a light ahead, just one, like a dim lantern swinging slightly. I slowed down. As I approached, I realized it was coming from an old farmhouse sitting far back off the road. The place looked like it had been abandoned decades ago. 2 stories, gray wood siding, shutters missing, roof sagging in the middle. But there was definitely a dim yellow light glowing from the downstairs window. I stopped the van and tried to check my phone for a map, but there was no signal. The silence was heavy, pressing. No crickets, no wind. Even the engine noise sounded wrong, too loud. Then I saw movement, a figure walking across the window. Just the shadow, but the way it moved was weird, like it was hunched over, dragging one leg. I stared at it, trying to decide whether to honk or just reverse the van all the way back down the gravel road. And then the light went out. No flicker, no fade, just total darkness in an instant. I've never turned a vehicle around so fast in my life. I pulled off a 12-point turn, practically tearing up the undercarriage in a ditch, and raced back the way I came. When I finally got to a main road, the GPS came back online, and I rerouted myself through a longer highway loop. I got to the store after midnight, unloaded in a daze, and drove back before the sun came up. I never told dispatch why I was late, and I never took another rural route again. About 2 weeks later, I was killing time during a night shift and started Googling strange landmarks in that area. I found a forum post, one of those weird things in Pennsylvania threads, mentioning an old house deep in the woods near a now defunct bridge. Locals called it the Crossing House. According to the post, a man murdered his family there in the 60s and kept their bodies inside for weeks before neighbors found out. He vanished before the police arrived. Some say he never left the area, just hid in the woods nearby. Others say he died and the house is cursed, and people who pass too close to it are never quite the same afterward. That would have just been a creepy story. Except the post had pictures. One of them, taken in daylight, was the exact same house I had seen. Same sagging porch, same missing shutters. Only this time, the window was broken and there was no sign of any working lights. Years later, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night thinking I hear gravel crunching just outside my house. And I always check the window to make sure there's no light out there. My second story comes from a friend of mine named Caleb, who worked security at a shipping yard in southern Texas. He told me this story in a Waffle House at 2 a.m. after our shifts. He never told it to anyone else, said it was the only thing that ever made him think about quitting for good. The shipping yard was massive. Several hundred acres of fenced-in property, warehouses, containers, and open fields of parked trailers. Caleb worked overnight shifts alone, just driving a golf cart around, checking locks and fences. Sometimes, the other guards would play pranks, fake calls about trespassers, leaving mannequins inside trailers, but nothing serious ever happened. One night in the summer of 2020, Caleb said he noticed that one of the empty trailers had its back door slightly open. Usually, if a door wasn't sealed, wind would blow it fully open. This one was just cracked. Suspicious, he parked the cart and went over with his flashlight. The trailer was half buried in darkness. He called out but got no answer. He swung the door open and aimed the flashlight inside. Nothing but metal walls and a few discarded plastic pallets. He climbed inside to check for animals or people hiding, gave it a quick walkthrough, and found nothing. But as he turned to leave, the flashlight flickered. Then, all at once, it died. He said it wasn't just the flashlight, his radio cut out too. Even his phone went black. Then the trailer door slammed shut. He ran to it, but it wouldn't budge. No sound from outside, no creaking, Just silence. He started banging, yelling, even kicking the door, but the metal felt solid, heavy, and unmoving. Then he heard something behind him, a faint sound like a whisper, too quiet to understand, but constant. He turned around, back pressed to the door, straining to hear. The whispering didn't stop. In fact, it got louder the longer he listened, like it was circling him. He could barely see in the dark, but he swore something moved in the far corner, a shape darker than the darkness, hunched and shifting. Caleb backed into the door, screaming. And just like that, the door opened. He tumbled out into the grass. The flashlight blinked back on. Radio crackled with static. Phone powered up. The trailer was empty. He said he locked it, then walked away without looking back. Never told the supervisor, but he marked that trailer in his own notes as "Do not open." A few months later, it was removed from the lot. No explanation, no paperwork, just gone. To this day, Caleb won't walk into any closed container, ever. The last story is mine again, and it's the one I try not to think about, even now. Back in college, I rented a house with 3 other guys just off campus in a small town in Ohio. The house was cheap, old, and definitely not up to code, but it had space and we were broke. Weird stuff started happening within the first month. Lights would flicker, doors would creak open even when locked, but we all chalked it up to the place being old. Until the basement. We weren't supposed to go down there. The landlord said it was for utilities only. Still, one day when the water pressure dropped, we had no choice. The stairs were rickety, steep, and covered in dust. At the bottom there were rusted pipes, a cracked concrete floor, and an old fuse box. But in one corner of the basement, behind a leaning shelf, was a heavy wooden door. It had no knob, just a hole where one might have been. We tried to peek through, but it was pitch black behind it. When we asked the landlord about it, he said it was sealed up years ago after flooding issues. A few weeks later, my roommate Tyler started acting strange. He'd stay up all night pacing, claimed he heard whispering coming from under the floorboards. Once, I caught him standing in the kitchen at 3 a.m., just staring at the basement door. When I asked what he was doing, he didn't answer, just walked away. Then he disappeared. One night, he went to bed like usual. In the morning, his bed was empty. Phone, keys, and wallet were still on the desk. No sign of struggle, nothing out of place. We searched the whole house, including the basement. That door in the corner was still shut tight. The police came, searched, asked questions, and filed a missing person report. But they didn't find anything. Weeks passed. We stopped going to classes. None of us wanted to be alone in the house. One night, I woke up to a loud noise, like something heavy falling. I grabbed a flashlight and followed the sound down to the basement. The door was open. Not the basement door, the sealed one in the corner. It was open just enough for me to see a staircase going down into total darkness. I called the others. We stood there for 10 minutes just staring, none of us brave enough to go in. Finally, one of us threw a rock through the gap. We heard it hit something metal, then a voice. It was faint, but it was Tyler, whispering, calling for help. We ran. By the time the cops came, the door was shut again. No staircase, just a wall behind it. The house was condemned months later due to structural problems, but I know what we saw, and somewhere deep underground I still hear him calling in my dreams. Story the end.
Story number 4.
I used to work the graveyard shift at a gas station just off I-90 in Montana. It wasn't a big chain, more like one of those old roadside setups with a single pump island, a tiny shop that sold warm beer, chips, and dusty souvenirs, and one flickering street light that buzzed when the wind picked up. We had a diner next door, but it closed at 10 p.m., so from then until 6 in the morning, it was just me, the hum of the freezer, and whatever passed through the highway in the dark. I always thought I was the kind of person who didn't scare easy. I grew up in a rough neighborhood in Butte, knew how to handle myself. The worst I figured I'd see on this job was a drunk or two, maybe a tweaker trying to steal beer. But what happened that winter still wakes me up some nights. The air around me cold, as if I'm back behind that counter with the door alarm chiming for no one. It started around early December. Snow was thick on the ground and the temperatures were brutal. I had a space heater behind the register, but it barely helped. Around 2 a.m. that night, a guy came in wearing a tattered brown coat. Looked like he hadn't shaved in weeks. His face was raw and red, eyes swollen. He didn't say anything, just walked straight to the bathroom. He was in there a while, maybe 20 minutes before I knocked. "You good in there?" I called through the door. Nothing. "I gotta lock up if you're not buying anything." Then I heard it. Not a voice, not words. Just crying. Low, hoarse sobbing like someone completely broken down. I stepped back, unsure what to do. I thought maybe he was sick or worse, using. I called the non-emergency line. Sheriff's office said they'd send someone out. The guy never came out of the bathroom. 10 minutes later, a deputy pulled up. We both went in together. The bathroom was empty. No window, no back door, nothing. Just a stained sink, a crusty toilet, and cracked tiles. No sign of anyone. The floor wasn't even wet. The deputy gave me a look like I was wasting his time. "You sure someone came in?" "Yeah. I watched him on camera." We checked the footage. You can see the guy walk in, clear as day. Tattered coat, long gait, head down. He walks toward the bathroom door, but then he's gone. Doesn't go in, doesn't walk out, just disappears between frames. The deputy rewound and replayed it twice. Then he said, "These old cameras sometimes skip. Probably just a glitch. Maybe he snuck out while you were distracted." I knew he didn't believe what he saw, but he didn't want to deal with it. After he left, I locked the bathroom and put a sign up. That night, I kept the lights on and didn't sit down once. A week later, I got a call from an older man in his 70s who lived on a nearby ranch. He came by once a month for propane and usually didn't say much. That night, though, he came in shaking. "I saw him," he said. "Who?" "The guy in the coat. He was walking down the shoulder past the diner around 3 a.m. I pulled over, thought he was broke down, got out of the truck to check, and he just disappeared." "Like walked off?" "No," the man whispered. "He blinked out. 1 second he was 5 feet away, the next he was gone. No sound, no tracks in the snow, nothing." He left without buying anything. I didn't see the man again until 3 weeks later, when I found out from another regular that he'd had a stroke the day after that visit. Never fully recovered. Never talked again. By January, I started dreading my shifts. The lights outside would flicker more often, and the cameras started acting up. Footage would glitch, showing people entering that never came through the door. I saw a woman once, hair soaked and hanging in front of her face, walk behind the chip aisle and never come out. I checked the store. No one was there. When I rewound the footage, she wasn't on it at all. My boss didn't care. As long as nothing got stolen and the till balanced, I could be hallucinating purple kangaroos for all he cared. I started bringing a thermos of coffee laced with whiskey just to get through the night. One evening, a guy named Corey, local tow truck driver, came by to fuel up. He was one of the few people who didn't laugh off what I'd seen. He told me a story about an accident that happened on that stretch of highway 5 years back. Bad pileup during a snowstorm. Truck jackknifed. Took out a minivan and 2 sedans. 7 dead. Anyone survive? One guy. Walking with his wife and daughter after their car stalled. He made it. They didn't. He tried to get back to them, but a rig crushed the van before he could. "You think that's who I saw?" He shrugged. "Some folks say the road remembers. Maybe grief sticks around longer than we do." It was poetic in a way, but I didn't find comfort in it. A few days later, I was working the midnight to 6 shift again. Snowstorm outside, wind slapping against the windows. I was halfway through counting cigarette cartons when the bell above the door chimed. No one came in. I walked around the counter, thinking it might be a draft or the door shifting from the wind. Then I saw the footprints, wet, fresh, leading from the door to the back corner of the store near the coolers. They just stopped, mid-aisle. I followed them, hands shaking, flashlight trembling in my grip. The store was dead silent, but I felt pressure in my chest like the air was pushing against me. I turned the flashlight toward the drinks aisle and saw him, the man in the brown coat. Only now his face was wrong. His skin looked pale and bloated, and his eyes were solid black. Not like sunglasses, like holes in his head. He raised his hand slowly and pointed at the back door. I ran. I locked myself in the restroom and called 911. Took them 40 minutes to arrive, and when they did, I was still inside, armed with a box cutter and a mop handle. The store was empty again. No footprints, no condensation on the door, no wet floor where the snow should have melted. They didn't find anything. I quit 2 weeks later. I thought leaving that place would bring peace, but it didn't. A year later, I was living in Missoula, working warehouse nights at a logistics company. Cleaner work, less isolation. I'd almost forgotten about the gas station until a man showed up at the warehouse one night. Brown coat, same gait, only this time it was in the security cam feed. He never entered the building, just stood at the edge of the loading dock, staring up at the camera. One of the guards asked if I knew him. I said no. I watched him for 20 minutes. He didn't move, just stood still as the snow fell around him. Then the feed glitched, and he was gone. 2 days later, one of the forklifts failed, crushed a guy, killed instantly. The feed showed no errors. It just failed. I didn't last long there after that. I've worked 5 jobs in 5 years. Convenience stores, shipping yards, night reception. Every time I think he's gone, he comes back, never closer than 50 feet, never makes a sound. But I know he's watching, waiting, and every time he appears, something terrible follows. I don't sleep through the night anymore. I moved to Arizona for the sun. No snow, no dark forests, no long stretches of road to nowhere. Still doesn't matter. He's here too. Last week, I found a brown coat hanging on my back porch. I live alone. I don't own anything like it. There were no footprints in the dirt, no signs of forced entry, just the coat, wet and heavy, as if someone had walked through a storm that never happened. I burned it. That night, I dreamed of the gas station again, only this time it was burning. Inside, the man stood behind the register, pointing at the bathroom. His eyes were holes, and his mouth hung open like he was trying to scream but had no voice left. When I woke up, the thermostat read 41 degrees. It was over 100 the day before. Everything in my fridge had spoiled. My phone clock was frozen at 2:37 a.m. I don't know what this is. Ghost, spirit, memory? I don't know. But I know he's real, and he's getting closer. Story the end.
Story number 5.
My cousin Joel used to work as a night janitor at a high school in northern Illinois. He was around 30, lived alone, and didn't talk much. When he did talk, you could tell he'd seen some things that didn't make a lot of sense. He wasn't the superstitious type, never talked about ghosts or aliens or anything like that. But there was one night he wouldn't stop talking about. I was staying with him for a few weeks while I was in between jobs. We were drinking in his kitchen when he told me this. He said it started off like any other shift. He clocked in around 10 p.m., made his rounds, cleaned bathrooms, vacuumed hallways, and emptied trash from the classrooms. The school was a big one, built in the late 60s with long, low ceilings and maze-like corridors. Most nights were quiet, except for the occasional rat or HVAC noise. Around midnight, he got to the auditorium. It was always the last place he cleaned because it creeped him out a little. The massive darkness, the old curtains, the empty seats. That night, he walked in and immediately noticed something was off. The stage curtain was drawn, even though he remembered leaving it open the night before. The lights were dimmer than usual, flickering slightly. As he swept the floor, he heard a soft, steady thumping sound coming from backstage. It was rhythmic, like someone tapping a broom handle on the wooden floor. He paused, called out, "Hello?" but got no answer. The thumping stopped. He figured it was a pipe or an animal and went to investigate. He stepped behind the curtain and into the darkness. The backstage area was even darker than the main auditorium. He turned on his flashlight and scanned the space. Nothing, just old props, stacked chairs, and cables. As he turned to go back, he heard something else, breathing, heavy and labored, not right next to him, but not far. He froze and pointed his light toward the sound. That's when he saw something move, something big. But the moment the light hit it, it was gone. He sprinted out of there and locked the auditorium behind him. When he told the head custodian the next morning, the guy just gave him a look and said, "Happens more than you think." Apparently, years back, a student had hanged himself from the rafters above the stage. The body wasn't found until a week later, when the smell got too strong. The janitors were the ones who found him. Since then, several had refused to clean the auditorium alone. One guy even quit mid-shift. Joel stayed another year, but never went back in there again. Another story I heard came from a girl I dated in college named Tara. She lived in a small town in central Ohio and worked as a home health aide for elderly patients. Most of the job was uneventful, helping people bathe, cook, take medication. But she told me about one woman that still gave her nightmares. Her name was Mrs. Gladys McKenna. She was 89, lived alone in a crumbling Victorian house at the edge of town. Her husband had died in the 70s, and her kids had all moved out of state. The house was cluttered, filled with religious statues and old furniture covered in plastic. There were rosaries on every doorknob, and mirrors in the house were all draped with black fabric. Tara asked about the mirrors once, and Mrs. McKenna just said, "They're dangerous at night." She assumed it was just dementia or superstition. The weirdness started slowly. One morning, she found all the chairs in the kitchen turned upside down on the table. Everyone. Mrs. McKenna said it must have been the house settling. Another day, the hallway was covered in dead flies, hundreds of them, all belly up. Tara cleaned them, but the next day, they were back. She called pest control, but they didn't find any nest or entry point. Then things got personal. Tara started hearing whispers, not from the woman, but from the walls. Faint and low, always just as she was walking through the hallway by the basement door. One day, she swore the door was open when she arrived, wide open, though Mrs. McKenna could barely walk, let alone go up and down stairs. Tara asked if anyone had come by. The old woman looked terrified and said, "He doesn't like when strangers are in his house." That was the first time she used he instead of talking about the house like it was just a place. That night, Tara dreamt about the basement. She said it felt more like a memory than a dream. She was walking down the stairs, holding a candle. The walls were made of stone, and there was a wooden chair in the middle of the room. A man sat in it, tall and thin, with no eyes, just empty sockets. He didn't move, just stared. When she woke up, she had scratches on her arm, 3 long lines that burned. She quit that day and never went back. 6 months later, the house caught fire. The official cause was electrical, but the fire chief said something strange. There were scorch marks on the walls in the basement that looked like handprints. Dozens of them. One of the creepiest stories I ever heard came from my older brother's best friend, Alan. He was a contractor who'd taken a job renovating an old hunting cabin deep in the Pennsylvania woods. It was one of those inherited properties. Belonged to a guy who died and left it to his nephew, Cat, who wanted to modernize it and eventually turn it into a rental. Alan went up there alone, expecting to spend a week fixing the foundation and installing new wiring. The cabin was about a mile from the nearest dirt road, surrounded by dense trees. No cell service, no neighbors, just him in the forest. The first day went fine. He set up camp, worked on clearing debris, and took some measurements. That night, around 2 a.m., he heard what sounded like someone walking around the cabin. He grabbed his flashlight, thinking maybe a bear or someone from town had wandered up. When he stepped outside, the woods were dead silent. No wind, no insects, just heavy stillness. He didn't see anyone, but when he walked around the cabin, he found something chilling. Boot prints. Human ones. Barefoot. They circled the cabin twice and then vanished into the trees. The dirt was dry, so the prints were clear. He stayed awake the rest of the night, hammer in hand. The next day he worked fast. By sundown he had the tools packed and was ready to leave the next morning. But the forest didn't want him to. That night, around the same time, he heard whispering, multiple voices, low and fast, circling the cabin. He turned on his lantern and saw shadows moving between the trees. Too tall, too thin, not human. The whispering turned into low, rumbling groans, like something trying to talk underwater. When he looked out the window, he saw something standing just beyond the tree line. Not a person. It had a face, but no features. Just smooth skin where the mouth and eyes should be, and arms that stretched nearly to its knees. He didn't sleep. As soon as the sun rose, he packed his truck and left. He told the owner he'd refund the deposit, but wouldn't finish the job. The man didn't seem surprised. He just said, it never liked strangers anyway. Years later, the cabin burned down. No cause was determined. The last story I'll tell you is my own. I was living in Portland, Oregon in 2019, sharing a basement apartment with a friend of mine named Chris. The place was old, probably built in the 40s, with bad insulation and exposed pipes. It was cheap and close to our jobs, so we took it without thinking. A few weeks in, we noticed something strange. Our closet door would open on its own, always around 3 a.m. We figured it was a draft or a bad latch, but it kept happening, even after we locked it from the outside. One night, I stayed up playing video games with headphones on. Around 3:10 a.m., I heard a knock behind me. I turned, thinking it was Chris. The closet door was open. Not just cracked, wide open. And it was pitch black inside, even though the rest of the room was lit. I stood up, heart pounding, and walked toward it. That's when I heard it, breathing, shallow, fast breathing, like someone trying not to be heard. I flipped on the closet light. Empty. I slammed it shut and put a chair against the handle. The next day, Chris told me he'd been waking up with bruises on his arms, 3 finger-shaped marks, always in the same spot. We moved out 3 weeks later. About a year after we left, the new tenant reached out to me on Facebook. She asked if anything strange had happened when we lived there. I lied, said no. She replied, "Okay, it's just something watches me sleep." Story the end.
Story number 6.
I used to work night shifts at a gas station in Central Oregon. Most nights were slow and uneventful, typical late-night customers, truckers, and a few regulars. The gas station was just off a rural highway, and beyond it was miles of forest and empty land. There were no other buildings nearby, just a few cabins deeper in the woods that people only used during summer or hunting season. It was remote, and when the sun went down, it was pitch black for miles. One night, I was working the graveyard alone. It was early October, the kind of night where fog hangs low and the air is cold enough to bite. Around 2 a.m., a pickup truck pulled into the station. It was old, the paint was faded, and it had no license plates. I didn't think much of it at first. Some people around here didn't bother registering their vehicles, especially if they were just used for farm work or hunting. But what got me was how long the truck just sat there without anyone getting out. The engine was off, no lights, and I couldn't see anyone through the windshield. Just a dark silhouette behind the glass. After 5 minutes, I stepped out from behind the counter and peered through the front window. Still, no movement. I reached for the phone to call the non-emergency police line just in case, but as soon as I picked it up, the door to the station opened and someone stepped inside. It was a man, tall, gaunt, wearing old hunting clothes that smelled like they hadn't been washed in years. He didn't say anything, just walked straight to the back of the store, to the coolers. I kept an eye on him through the mirrors placed in the corners of the ceiling. He didn't open the fridge. He just stood there for a long time, staring at the glass doors. I asked, "Can I help you with anything?" My voice echoed more than I expected in the stillness. He didn't respond. Then he finally turned around and stared at me. Not in a threatening way, but the kind of stare that just drills into you, like he was looking through me. He started walking toward the counter, slow, one heavy boot at a time. My stomach dropped as he got closer. He stopped at the counter and placed a single can of chewing tobacco down. I rang it up. He pulled out a crumpled dollar bill and change that looked like it had mud caked into the grooves. I gave him his change, and he turned and walked out without a word. I watched him get back into his truck, but he didn't start the engine. Just sat there again. I finally called the sheriff's office. They said they'd send someone out to check it. It took them 30 minutes to get there. By the time the deputy arrived, the truck was gone, just tire tracks in the gravel. The deputy told me something I've never forgotten. He said, "You're not the first one to see that truck. A few reports over the years, always late night, always no plates, no driver anyone can describe clearly. Some people think it's a prank. Others say it's connected to an old murder case. A hunter disappeared out here in '96. Body never found, just a truck left in the woods and blood in the front seat." I didn't sleep easy for weeks after that. Another story I can't shake happened to my cousin Isaac. He drives long-haul routes across the Midwest and the South. He's a seasoned trucker, not one to get spooked easily. But there was one night in Louisiana that rattled him so badly he almost quit the job. He was parked at a rest area just off a rural stretch of road near Shreveport. It was one of those outdated rest stops, 2 bathrooms, a couple vending machines, and dim lighting that buzzes like flies in your ears. He parked at the far end of the lot so he could get some sleep without being disturbed by other trucks coming and going. Around midnight, he started dozing off in his sleeper cab when something woke him. He said it wasn't a sound or movement. It was just a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread, like he was being watched, like something was wrong. He sat up and looked out his side mirror. Nothing. No headlights, no movement. Then he saw it. A figure standing in the tree line behind the rest area. It was far enough that he couldn't make out details, but close enough that it was clearly watching him. At first he thought it was a deer or a person stretching their legs, but the way it stood, completely still, arms at its side, no shift in posture, wasn't normal. He kept watching, and suddenly the figure stepped forward into the dim glow of the lot lights. It was a woman, pale, thin, in a dirty white dress that looked soaked from the waist down, hair stringy and wet. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, her mouth slightly open. Isaac said she looked like she'd been pulled out of a lake, but there were no lakes nearby, just woods and swamp. She started walking toward his truck. He started the engine immediately and turned on his high beams. In that instant, she vanished. Not ran, not ducked, just gone, like she had never been there. He swears to this day he was awake, alert, not dreaming. He ended up calling the police and driving through the night to a rest stop 3 hours away. He's never taken that route since. Then there's my sister's friend, Olivia. She grew up in a town in southern Idaho and lived with her grandparents after her mom passed away. Their house was old, built sometime in the 1940s, on the edge of a long field. Olivia always said the place felt too quiet. Not peaceful, just too quiet. At night, it felt like the silence itself was watching her. One summer when she was 16, strange things started happening. Doors would creak open even though the windows were closed. Lights would flicker, not rapidly, just one quick pulse, like someone flipping the switch from somewhere you couldn't see. At first, her grandparents chalked it up to old wiring and drafts, but then Olivia started waking up in the middle of the night to the sound of breathing. Not her own, not her grandfather's snoring down the hall. Breathing, heavy and shallow, coming from somewhere in the room. She would turn on the lamp next to her bed, and it would stop. This happened 3 nights in a row. On the 4th night, she woke up again. Same breathing, but this time, she didn't turn on the light right away. She listened, trying to place where it was coming from. She realized it was near her closet. She slowly reached for the lamp switch, and just before the light clicked on, she saw something move. A dark shape, tall, near the closet door. When the light came on, the room was empty, but the closet door was open just a crack. She told her grandparents the next day. Her grandfather was a quiet man, never one for ghost stories, but he went pale. He pulled an old shoebox out of the attic and gave it to Olivia. Inside were newspaper clippings from the 1970s. One article was about a boy who had gone missing in that house. A foster child. Police searched the property, but never found him. Just some strange scratches inside the closet door and broken wood panels behind it. The case went cold. The article mentioned that before he disappeared, the boy complained of a tall man standing in the corner of the room at night. They moved out that fall. Even stranger than all that is something that happened to me personally about 10 years ago. I was camping with a few friends in the Sierra Nevada mountains. We hiked out far, no cell service, no other groups nearby. We found a spot beside a stream and pitched our tents. That first night was normal. Campfire, drinks, stories. But the second night, something changed. I woke up around 3 a.m. to what sounded like someone walking around the campsite. I unzipped my tent quietly and peeked out. Everyone was still asleep in their tents. But the footsteps kept going, crunching in the pine needles, slow, deliberate steps like someone circling the camp. I whispered for my friend Danny. No response. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out, heart pounding. The steps stopped. I walked a few feet toward the edge of the camp, shining the light into the trees. Nothing, just dark, endless forest. Then I heard a whisper. My name. It wasn't one of my friends. It was raspy, wrong, like it was being mimicked by someone who had only heard it once. I turned and ran back to my tent. In the morning, I asked if anyone else heard anything. One friend admitted he'd woken up to what sounded like someone whispering just outside his tent. Another said he thought he saw a figure watching us from the ridge the evening before, but didn't want to freak anyone out. We packed up and hiked out early. I don't tell these stories to scare people for fun. They're real, at least to the people who lived them, including me. You can explain some things away, faulty wiring, dreams, tricks of the light, but sometimes there's no explanation. Just an icy weight in your chest and the knowledge that something saw you and let you walk away. Story the end.
Story number 7.
A couple years ago, I picked up some seasonal work doing house inspections for a real estate agency. They'd send me into properties that were abandoned, foreclosed, or just listed but empty, and I'd take photos, do light assessments, and report anything unusual. Most of it was boring. Spider webs, peeling paint, broken windows. But there was one house out in northern Pennsylvania that still gives me chills just thinking about it. It was a cloudy Friday when I got the assignment. The house was in a dying town tucked deep in the woods, population maybe a few hundred. I had to drive nearly an hour down roads that got narrower and more beat up the farther I went. The GPS dropped off about 5 miles from the address, so followed a printed map the rest of the way. The place was a sagging two-story colonial, white paint flaking off the sides, shutters hanging crooked. The front yard was overgrown with yellowed grass and spindly trees. No tire tracks, no signs of anyone having visited in a long while. The lockbox opened easily, and I stepped into a foyer that reeked of old wood, damp carpet, and something faintly metallic. Blood, maybe, but it didn't smell fresh. Inside, everything was exactly as the notes described. Most furniture gone, walls water-stained, ceilings cracked. I started taking photos, starting upstairs, moving room to room with my flashlight. The whole time, the air felt heavy, too still, like the air in a basement after a flood. Not a single bird outside, no creaking, no wind. I remember thinking how quiet it was, so quiet I could hear the electrical buzz from my flashlight. I was halfway down the second-floor hallway when I noticed a door that wasn't on the floor plan. Between two bedrooms, tucked near the stairs, was a narrow door about 5 feet tall. Old, warped wood. It hadn't been mentioned in any of the prior inspection reports. I tried the knob, expecting it to be locked, but it clicked open. Behind the door was a set of narrow stairs leading down into darkness, much steeper than usual stairs. It wasn't a normal basement entrance. I hesitated. The flashlight barely cut through the darkness. I didn't want to go down, but curiosity won out. Halfway down the stairs, I started to hear it. Breathing. Faint, irregular. Human. It stopped the moment I paused. I wanted to turn around and leave right then, but I kept telling myself it was probably air moving through vents or some small animal trapped below. I made it to the bottom and found myself in a dirt-floored room, maybe 10 by 10 feet. It was cold, and there was a sharp chemical smell. My light caught something hanging from the ceiling. Wires, maybe, or string. No, hair. Strands of long black hair were nailed into the wooden beams above me. Bundles of it, dozens of them. Below each was a small tin can like a cat food can. Inside were burnt scraps of paper, bones, melted wax. There was a stained mattress in the corner and a small wooden chair facing the far wall. And on that wall, hundreds of scratch marks. Deep, violent grooves that tore through the drywall into the studs. Suddenly I heard the breathing again. Louder this time. Behind me. I spun around with the flashlight, heart slamming. Nothing. Just the staircase. I backed toward it slowly, but then I heard the creak of the steps above me. Footsteps. Slow and deliberate, someone descending. I couldn't see anyone, but I swear on everything I heard those steps, and they got closer. I bolted up those stairs so fast I tripped twice, slamming my shoulder into the door frame when I burst back into the hallway. I slammed the small door shut and dragged a cabinet across it. I stood there panting, flashlight trembling in my hand, waiting for something to pound on the other side. But nothing happened. Silence again. Like it never made a sound at all. I didn't finish the inspection. I didn't care if I got fired. I grabbed my bag and ran out of that house, locking it behind me. When I got back to town, I didn't even file a report. I just told the agency the property was structurally unsafe and needed a full evaluation. Later, out of morbid curiosity, I looked up the address online. It used to belong to a family of 5, all of whom had disappeared in 1997. No signs of forced entry, no known enemies, no suspects. Just vanished overnight. The only clue the police found was a note written in crayon on the kitchen wall. He talks in the floor. I still dream about that breathing sometimes, and in the dreams, I never make it out. A friend of mine, Tanya, told me this story that shook me so bad I couldn't sleep for days. She worked in a 24-hour diner just outside of Nashville. It was one of those older places with red booths and a long counter, mostly serving truckers and late-night drunks. She'd taken the overnight shift for extra money. Most nights were slow, but she always had a couple regulars. One night around 2:30 a.m., she was wiping down the counter when a man walked in. Tall, bony, dressed in an old brown coat, pale like he hadn't seen daylight in years. What struck her most, she said, were his eyes. Yellowish white, like cataracts, but clear enough to look directly at her. He didn't sit, just stood near the entrance. Tanya greeted him, asked if he wanted coffee or a booth. The man didn't answer, just smiled, wide, unnatural, and walked to the restroom in the back. The diner was mostly empty except for one trucker dozing in a booth, so she let it go and kept cleaning. After 20 minutes, she realized he hadn't come out yet. She knocked on the bathroom door. No response. Eventually, she opened it. The room was empty. No windows, no other exits. The only way in or out was past her at the front counter. She checked the stalls, the ceiling tiles, everything. He was gone. Shaken, she asked the trucker if he saw the man leave. The guy said no, said he'd been awake the whole time and never saw anyone exit the restroom. Tanya called her manager and asked to check the security cameras. The footage showed the man entering, standing, walking to the restroom. Then, nothing. The camera aimed at the bathroom door never showed him coming back out. In fact, there was a strange flicker at the exact minute she opened the door, like static, but only for a second. The next night, she almost didn't go in, but bills are bills. Around the same time, 2:30 a.m., she saw movement outside. That same man standing under the flickering sign across the road. Just standing, staring directly at her through the window. Tanya locked the door and called the cops. By the time they arrived, he was gone again. No footprints, no tire marks, just the lingering smell of mold and something rotting. A few weeks later, an older cook who'd worked there for years told her about a guy who died in that restroom back in the 80s. Overdosed in the stall, wasn't found for 2 days. The way the cook described him, tall, bony, weird smile, matched the man exactly. Tanya quit the week after. She swears to this day she still sees him sometimes. Always at night, always watching. When I was in college, my roommate Mark told us this story from his childhood. He grew up in rural Montana in a small house built in the 1930s. His family wasn't wealthy, so they'd stayed in that same house for decades, even though strange things always seemed to happen there. It started when he was around 8. Every night, just after midnight, the door to the basement would creak open. At first, his parents thought it was a draft. They even changed the hinges and installed a latch. But no matter what, the door would always be found open by morning. Mark started having nightmares, someone standing at the foot of his bed whispering things he couldn't understand. He began wetting the bed, became withdrawn. His parents sent him to therapy, thinking it was stress or night terrors. One night, his dad decided to sit up with him and catch whatever was scaring him. Around midnight, the basement door opened, slowly, quietly. His dad, thinking maybe someone was sneaking in, grabbed a bat and crept down the stairs. What he found at the bottom made him freeze. Dozens of tiny handprints covered the concrete floor, like a child's but thinner, longer fingers. At the far end in the shadows, something moved. He didn't wait. He grabbed Mark, locked the basement, and called the sheriff. The deputies searched the whole place and found no one. But in the crawl space behind the basement wall, they found something else. Old, rotting dolls with their eyes gouged out, little bones, animal, maybe, and a journal. The journal belonged to the house's original owner, a man who'd worked at an orphanage. It was full of disturbing entries about taking the children to his basement to help them see the truth. He'd vanished without a trace in 1941. The family moved out 2 weeks later. Mark's parents still live nearby, but they won't even drive past the old house. It's been abandoned for years, but neighbors claim they see lights in the windows some nights. And every kid who's dared to sneak in says the same thing. The basement door is always open. Story the end.
Story number 8.
I used to drive trucks for a living. Nothing fancy, just local hauls around the southeast. I was on the road enough to feel the loneliness, but not so much that I lost my mind. Still, I had my fair share of weird experiences, mostly small things. A guy stumbling out of the woods in the middle of the night, odd lights above tree lines, things like that. But one night changed everything. I've never really spoken in detail about it before. People laugh or shrug it off, and maybe I would too if it hadn't happened to me. It was late November, a Wednesday. The air had turned cold early that year. I had a delivery scheduled out to a warehouse near the Kentucky-Tennessee border. Not quite remote, but far enough from town that you wouldn't want to get stranded. My dispatch had me haul equipment, nothing special, just maintenance gear. I picked it up late that afternoon, fueled up, checked everything, and hit the road. By the time I crossed into Tennessee, it was already pitch black. The road turned rural real quick, 2 lanes with no shoulders and only the moonlight to break the darkness. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary, just another quiet night run. About an hour from my drop, I started feeling strange. Not sick, not tired, just an uncomfortable awareness, like someone was watching me. It made the hairs on my arms stand up. I checked my mirrors, glanced behind me, turned down the radio, and rolled down the window. Nothing. Just wind, tree silhouettes, and the occasional road sign flashing past. Then my CB crackled. Just static at first. I didn't use it much except to get updates on traffic, but this time I swear I heard something. A voice. Low. Dragging like it was underwater. I couldn't make out what it said at first. Then, again, clearer. Don't stop. That was it. I stared at the receiver for a second, then picked up the mic. Come again? Silence. Then static again. I waited. Nothing more. I told myself it was a prank. Some other driver screwing around. Maybe some local on an open frequency trying to get laughs. Still, it rattled me. I kept driving, eyes now jumping between mirrors more than they should have. I even considered pulling into a truck stop just to catch my breath, but the voice, don't stop. It rang in my head louder than anything. I pushed on. About 15 minutes later, something caught my eye on the side of the road. A figure. Just standing there. I was going about 55, so it came and went quick. But in that brief moment, I could swear it was a man in some kind of coat, his arm outstretched like he was hitchhiking. I kept going. Then another figure. And another. Every few hundred feet, someone stood on the side of the road, all alone, always facing the road. Not moving. Just watching. I slowed down a little, thinking maybe there'd been a crash or something. People needing help. But no cars were around. No wrecks, no signs of life. Just standing figures. The longer I looked, the more I realized something was wrong with the way they stood. Too stiff, too still. Not like they were waiting, like they were placed. I didn't stop. Around the next bend, my headlights caught something directly in the road. I slammed the brakes and the whole rig shook. Right in front of me, sitting on the yellow line, was a woman. Her hair was covering her face, and she was barefoot in a thin dress like she'd walked out of a hospital or something. No shoes, no jacket. Just sitting there with her knees pulled up, arms wrapped tight. I leaned on the horn. Nothing. She didn't move. My radio crackled again, same voice. Keep driving. My fingers were locked on the wheel. I didn't want to hurt anyone, but I couldn't just step out. Something in me screamed not to. So I hit the horn again, longer this time. She moved, not like a person. It was jerky. Her limbs bent strangely, like she was being pulled by invisible wires. She stood in one slow, rigid motion, her head still down. I could see her feet dirty, red from the cold. Then her head snapped up. I will never forget that face. Eyes too wide, mouth too long, like her skin didn't quite fit her skull. It wasn't a face meant for a living person. Her head twitched as she took a step forward, right toward the truck. I hit the gas. She lunged. Not ran. Lunged. I heard a loud thump on the side of the cab as I passed her. Then I saw her in the mirror, standing again, back on the line, watching me drive away. I didn't stop the rest of the route. I kept going until I pulled into the warehouse lot, hands shaking so bad I could barely sign the delivery paperwork. The guy who took the freight asked if I was okay. I lied. Said I'd been driving too long without coffee. I didn't take that route again. I thought it was a one-time thing. Maybe I was just exhausted or cracked under stress. But then I started noticing them on other trips. Different highways, different states. Always at night, always when I was alone. Figures in the dark. Sometimes standing. Sometimes crouched. Once I passed a man crawling across the road on all fours, his head twisted all the way around like a broken doll's. I tried to tell myself they weren't real. Hallucinations. Sleep deprivation. Except it didn't stop when I quit driving. 6 months after I left the job, I was driving back from a friend's house on a rural back road. Around 1 a.m., nothing but woods and silence. I hadn't thought about the figures in a while. Then, as I rounded a bend, my headlights caught a man on the side of the road. Same stillness, same blank stare. I passed him and looked in the mirror. He wasn't there. Now they come in my dreams. Or maybe it's not dreams. I wake up and they're outside the house at the tree line, not moving, watching. Once, one was right by my bedroom window, just staring. I've moved since then, changed numbers, cut ties with most of my old trucking buddies. But sometimes on long drives, if I let myself think too hard, I wonder what would have happened if I had stopped. That first night, when the woman was in the road, would I have vanished? Or worse, become one of them? Because the more I remember her face, the more I think I've seen it again. On a different road, on a different night, watching someone else, and I swear she smiled. Story the end.
Story number 9.
I used to work at a regional hospital in Pennsylvania on the graveyard shift as an orderly. Not glamorous work, but it paid the bills. I didn't have many people in my life then, so being awake at night and sleeping during the day suited me. Fewer people to talk to, fewer distractions. Mostly I handled transport requests, restocking supply rooms, the odd cleaning assignment when maintenance was swamped. You'd be surprised how quiet hospitals get after midnight. At least they're supposed to be. The wing I worked most often in was the east side of the third floor, mostly recovery rooms and a few observation beds for psych patients. Nothing particularly intense. The lights were always dimmed after 10 p.m., and most of the floor had only 1 or 2 nurses and 1 security guard watching the elevators. It was easy to get used to the rhythm. I worked with the same people every night for over a year. Then, in late 2020, we started noticing something strange on that floor. I remember the first time clearly. It was around 3:15 a.m., and I was walking from one supply closet to another, wheeling a cart with clean linens. I was passing room 327 when I heard it, a soft knock on the window. That wouldn't be strange if room 327 faced the hallway, but it didn't. The window in that room faced the parking lot, 3 stories down. I stopped and listened again. Nothing. I figured I must have imagined it. The hospital is full of weird little noises at night, heaters kicking on, ice machines humming, the distant ding of an elevator, but then I heard it again. 3 quick knocks. Precise. From the outside. I pushed open the door to 327. The patient, a quiet elderly woman recovering from hip surgery, was fast asleep. The room was dark, only the moonlight spilling in through the blinds. I walked over and opened them slowly. There was nothing there. No birds, no trees brushing the glass. Just empty air between the 3rd floor window and the asphalt below. I stood there for a few seconds before shaking it off and heading back into the hall. I didn't even bother mentioning it to the nurses. But a week later, another orderly said something to me during shift change. "Hey, you ever notice anything weird around 327?" he asked. I tensed a little, but tried to play it cool. "Like what?" He looked around, lowered his voice. "Knocking. From the outside. A couple nights ago. I thought it was just me going nuts." I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I nodded. "Yeah, same here." That started a kind of quiet curiosity. A few of us who worked that wing at night started keeping track. It wasn't every night. Sometimes nothing would happen for days. But every so often, one of us would hear that knocking. Always 3 knocks, always from the outside of the window, and always around 3 a.m. Eventually, the nurses started noticing too. One of them, a tough woman named Maria, who'd worked there longer than anyone, told us something that made the hair on my arms stand up. Back in 2015, a patient had jumped from that exact room, 327. A middle-aged man recently discharged from the psych ward after a suicide attempt. He was deemed stable, moved to the recovery floor, and 2 nights later, he broke the window and jumped. Died on impact. According to Maria, he'd told her the night before that someone was knocking on his window, calling him by name. Management replaced the glass and covered it up, told staff not to discuss it with patients. Most of the new hires didn't know the story. Over the next few months, it got worse. Security started getting alerts from motion sensors on the East Wing's fire escape, despite it being locked from the inside and only accessible from the floor itself. No one ever found anyone out there, but we kept getting those alerts, always between 3 and 3:30 a.m. Then the patient started reporting it. Not just in room 327. Others on the east side began asking who was walking the halls at night, tapping on their windows. One night, a woman recovering from surgery in room 322 pressed her call button, terrified. I was the one who answered it. She grabbed my arm the second I walked in. Her eyes were wide and she was shaking. "He was at the window," she whispered. "The man. He was looking in." "Ma'am," I said gently, "this is the third floor." She wouldn't let go of me. He had blood all over his face. The nurse on duty checked her vitals and eventually gave her a sedative. I stayed in the room for a while after she fell asleep. I didn't see anything outside that night, but I didn't sleep easy the next day. 2 weeks later, we lost a nurse. Tamara was new, only 3 months on the job. She was friendly, sharp, never the type to overreact. One night she left for a break around 2:45 a.m. She never came back. Security found her ID badge on the floor near the stairwell, the same fire escape that kept setting off alarms. Her car was still in the lot. Her purse was still in the break room. They never found her. Cops searched the building, the grounds, even the nearby woods. No leads. No signs of a struggle. Just gone. The hospital issued a formal statement. Employee disappearance under investigation. No safety concerns. They offered grief counseling. Gave us all a week off. But when we came back, things were worse. The knocking was happening almost every night. Not just at 327. Rooms up and down the east side reported it. We started seeing strange shapes on the security monitors, brief flashes like someone walking just out of frame. But when someone checked, the hallway was empty. One night, I stayed late to help the maintenance guy, Darren, check the electrical panel near the east stairwell. He was convinced the motion sensors were being triggered by faulty wiring. I wasn't so sure. We opened the panel, scanned for faults, ran some tests. Then, just as we were about to pack it up, the lights in the stairwell flickered. The panel wasn't connected to that circuit. Then we both heard the creak of the stairwell door opening. Darren stepped out with his flashlight and peered down the metal stairs. "Hello?" he called. There was no answer, just silence. He started walking down. I should have stopped him, but I didn't. About 10 seconds passed. Then I heard him scream. Not a startled yell, a full, panicked, gut-deep scream. It echoed off the walls like something out of a nightmare. I rushed down the stairs and found him curled on the landing, back pressed against the wall, eyes locked on the door to the second floor below. He was whispering, "Don't open it. Don't open it." I helped him up, got him back upstairs. He wouldn't tell me what he saw, just kept repeating that someone was behind that door, whispering his name, saying it over and over in a voice he said was his mother's, but she'd been dead for 10 years. He quit the next morning. At this point, I considered leaving too. I even handed in my resignation. But before my 2 weeks were up, one final thing happened. I was on a solo restocking run around 2:30 a.m., pushing a supply cart through the east hallway. The lights were dimmed, most patients were asleep, and everything was quiet. As I passed room 327, I heard the knocking again. 3 taps, then silence. I stood there, frozen. My heart thudded in my chest. Then I heard my name, soft, from inside the room. Not a hallucination, not static. A voice, saying my name clearly and slowly. I opened the door. The patient in the bed was asleep, but someone was standing in the far corner. It was a man, wearing a hospital gown, blood dried down one side of his face, his head hung slightly, like it was broken at the neck, and he was smiling. I backed away and slammed the door. When I looked again, the room was empty. Patient still asleep, no sign of the man. I quit the next day. Didn't wait for the 2 weeks. Years later, I still have nightmares about that night, the way he said my name. That smile. I heard they closed off room 327 in 2023, turned it into storage, but the staff still report knocking in the east wing. They say a few more patients have gone missing. Some claim to see faces in the glass at night. I don't talk to anyone from that hospital anymore. I don't want to know what's happening now. Some places hold on to grief, some buildings don't forget, and some windows never stop knocking. Story, the end.